Alright, what's happening, guys? We're going to do a little build video here for those of you guys that have supercharged Yamahas. Today we're going to be putting a 50 millimeter tile Turbosmart blow-off valve on the FX. What we're going to be doing is taking the cover off, and this is the tube right here that's got to come off. There's a couple different ways to tie this in to the vacuum. You can either actually drill and tap the manifold, or you can actually tap it right into the map sensor lines. People have different opinions on what's better than another. On the GP, I actually tapped it into the map sensor lines. It's been running strong for 2 years, so no issues whatsoever. So that's the route we're going to go on the FX. Let's get started. All right, now that we got the engine cover off, it gives us much easier access to the hose that we're going to be replacing. The hose goes from the intercooler down into the supercharger. Basically, there's two clamps, one here and one down here. We're just going to remove those. Now, the top one was very easy to get to with just a stubby screwdriver, flathead. It's important to keep these. These are going to be used for the new hose. If you get into a situation like I've got down here, what you're going to want to get is a small ratchet with a 9/32 bit on it. That's going to allow you to get in there and get that undone. Now that we've got both clamps loosened, we're just going to wiggle this off. Now make sure you don't drop these clamps. And that's the part we're replacing. Now that we've got the hose off, we're going to put the clamps on both ends of the new one, making sure that this piece for the vacuum is pointing up. Now what I like to do is I like to actually use some glass cleaner on the inside of the hose. That way it slides on easier. So I generously apply some Windex or Rain-X automotive glass cleaner on the inside and pop it on. Now that we've got the tube on, we want to make sure that the hose is actually seated against these on both sides. And now we want to tighten down the clamps, but we want to make sure that they're in a position to easily access for removal. Part of the reason I had to use the ratchet was because the bottom clamp was in a position that I couldn't get to with the flathead screwdriver. All right, now that we've got both clamps tightened down, we can actually move on to tying it into the map sensor port, which is going to be found on the back over here. All right, well, it's best to put some sort of a work light down here so you can see what you're doing. To give you guys an idea of where the map sensor line is that we're going to tap into, basically right under here, there's a gray tube. Okay, it's coming down from this piece and going right down into here. What we're going to do is we're going to put the plastic splitter in line and run the map sensor new tubing line up over and up to the blow-off valve. Now, one thing I want to warn you guys with is they barely give you enough tube to complete the install. So do not cut this tube until you get to the final steps. First, what I do is I lock it on to the port. So I pushed it on there, stretch this out. And as you can see, we are barely there. So we're going to need to make some cuts, but we're not going to do that quite yet. If you guys order from PWC Muscle, which I do recommend, they give Western New York PWC a great discount and their top-notch service. They will drop ship this to you from R&D. R&D will send you, upon request, this 4-way splitter. This is only needed if you're tying into the vacuum line. So make sure that if you plan on tying it into the vacuum line and not drilling and tapping the manifold, you need this splitter. It's the only way to do it. So make sure you ask for it. Now the next step, the splitter is going to come with a block off. You're going to want to take a black zip tie or a white zip tie, doesn't really matter, and make sure you tighten that down pretty good. So we're going to do that now. Now this is a good shot looking straight down. Again, this right here is the tube we got to splice into. These clamps here are very difficult to get off. I definitely recommend using a set of needle nose pliers. This piece here wiggles. You want to be very careful when you're getting this hose off that you do not snap this. Take your time. It's going to take a little bit, but be very careful with this. Alright, after a couple minutes of fighting with this, I actually figured out that it's actually a lot easier. Instead of taking the hose off the top piece, take it off the bottom piece. Just be very careful again. This is a plastic nipple down here. You don't want to snap that off. A vacuum leak will give you a headache. So be very careful with that. We're going to start to tie in some of the hose that comes from the blow-off valve. And we're going to use zip ties to tie it all together. Now before we start cutting any tubing, I like to have a very clean install. So you'll notice I'm actually zip tying the vacuum hose to the cover frame where the actual cover mounts to. So we're going to tighten those down. We're going to run the wire as clean as possible. Be very careful just not to have the hose against anything that's going to get super hot. You know, the engine itself, these things throw off quite a bit of heat. You don't want to melt your way through to a vacuum leak. So let's get that buttoned up and we'll move on to the next step. All right, now that we got this all tapped in, I had to monkey with this a little bit. I couldn't video it. I've only got 2 hands, so basically I switched this over to the end. You can see it goes down into here, taps into here, and then back down. That's pretty much it, guys. So we're actually going to fire it up, see how it works. And just to give you guys an idea, about an inch and a half, that's all the excess tubing you're going to have if you do this the right way. So very, very little room for error. It would be nice if they included more tubing, but it is enough. Now again, just make sure you got that zip tied down there, the vacuum line to the actual blow-off valve. Make sure you're not too tight on your attachment points. You don't want any kinks in the line preventing the vacuum. And again, you want to make sure you're clearing any hot components, and you want to make sure that everything's either zip tied or clamped down. As you can see, we got our clamps, zip ties. We should be good to go. All right, here goes nothing. And that's how you install a blow-off valve on an FX Cruiser SVHO.